The sound of her chattering teeth is what I remember most. That sharp, uncontrollable clack echoing through the frozen December night, cutting through the muffled laughter spilling from the warm house behind her. My daughter stood outside in the snow, her tiny body trembling so violently I thought she might collapse at any moment. She pressed her little red hands against the frosted glass, staring in at her cousins who were stuffing themselves with roasted turkey and mashed potatoes, while she remained abandoned in the cold. "Mommy!" Her lips barely moved, a whisper lost in the winter wind. It was Christmas Eve, the night families are supposed to come together. The night joy should spill over like mulled wine from a brimming cup. But instead, my child, the child I carried, the one I sacrificed everything for, was left outside like a stray animal. While my husband's family sat inside, their faces glowing with firelight and cruelty. When I saw her, something broke inside me. Something primal, something fierce. I dropped the grocery bag. I had been clutching apples rolled across the icy driveway, one splitting open against the hard ground. I ran to her, scooping her up, feeling how frighteningly cold her skin was against my palms. "Who did this?" My voice cracked. "Who left you out here?" She tried to speak, but her lips were purple, her jaw stiff. All she could do was bury her face in my coat. I stormed up to the door, yanked it open, and the heat hit me like a slap. Inside, golden light, clinking glasses, the aroma of roasted meat. And laughter, so much laughter. It felt like mockery. Every eye turned toward me as I carried my daughter into the room. "What is this?" I screamed. Why was she outside? The room went quiet. My mother-in-law, seated at the head of the long table like a queen presiding over her court, tilted her head with a disdainful smirk. Oh, she must have wandered out. "Children do foolish things. Don't lie to me," I snapped, my voice rising higher than I'd ever allowed it before. She couldn't have opened that heavy door by herself. Someone locked her out. No one spoke. My husband avoided my gaze, staring down at his plate as though the pile of gravy-soaked potatoes could save him. His silence was worse than his mother's venom. It was betrayal wrapped in cowardice. I felt my daughter's body trembling in my arms. I turned and walked straight back out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Snow swirled around us, but the fire burning inside me was hotter than any hearth. That was the night I knew things would never be the same. The truth is, this moment didn't come out of nowhere. The cruelty had been building for years, like snow piling on a weak roof until the weight finally crushes it. My marriage to Daniel had begun with such naive hope, such desperate love. Or maybe, in hindsight, it wasn't love at all. It was me clinging to the promise of stability, a family, of belonging somewhere after years of scraping by alone. I grew up poor, raised by a single mother who worked herself to exhaustion in a laundromat. I knew the sting of secondhand clothes that never fit, of cupboards with more dust than food. When Daniel first courted me, I thought I had stumbled into a miracle. He was tall, handsome, and above all, wealthy, or at least, his family was. His parents owned multiple properties. 5A had passed down investments that provided endless streams of income. And their family name carried respect in our small town. Daniel swept me into a world I had never known. Dinners at upscale restaurants where the bill equaled my mother's monthly rent. Vacations in resorts where the sheets smelled of luxury and chlorine. But even then, I noticed the disdain in his mother's eyes whenever she looked at me. "You're pretty," she told me once, her smile as sharp as broken glass. "But beauty fades. What else do you have to offer my son?" I was foolish enough to laugh it off. I told myself it was just nerves, just a protective mother. But over time, the cracks widened. Every holiday became a performance. Every family gathering an arena where I was tested, belittled, measured, and always found lacking. When our daughter Emily was born, I thought things might change. Surely a grandchild would soften her. Surely blood would melt ice. But I was wrong. Instead, Emily became another pawn in their cruel games. I worked part-time jobs to help with bills, but Daniel's family always reminded me of the balance of power. "Don't forget," his mother would say, waving her manicured hand toward their home where we lived rent-free. "You have a roof over your head because of us." Be grateful. Gratitude, that was the leash she tried to fasten around my neck. And for years, I wore it. I swallowed my pride, endured their humiliations because I thought stability was worth the price. But on that Christmas Eve, when I found Emily shivering outside, I realized that leash had been strangling me all along. Do you want to know the truth? My sister later asked me when I called her in tears that night. They don't hate you. They hate that you won't submit completely. They want to break you. Her words echoed in my head long after I hung up, because deep down, I knew she was right. The next day, I confronted Daniel. Why didn't you defend her? I demanded. My voice was ragged, my hands shaking. He looked tired, or maybe just indifferent. You always make things bigger than they are. My family doesn't mean harm. You're overreacting. Overreacting. I nearly laughed. She could have frozen to death. Our daughter. And you sat there and said nothing? He sighed, rubbing his temples like I was some unbearable headache. What do you want from me? To fight with my family. To start a war at Christmas dinner? Yes. I screamed, slamming my fist on the table. That's exactly what I wanted. I wanted you to choose your daughter over your mother. I wanted you to choose us. His silence answered me more than his words ever could. That was the beginning of the unraveling. But before I tell you how far things spiraled, I need to take you back to the little betrayals that paved the road to that nightmare Christmas Eve. It started with money. It always does, doesn't it? When Daniel and I first married, his parents insisted on managing our finances. It's just easier this way, his mother explained. We'll help you budget, help you invest wisely. You're young. You don't want to make mistakes. What that meant in practice was control. Every paycheck I earned was deposited into a joint account that his mother had full access to. Every purchase I made was scrutinized. Why are you buying secondhand clothes? She sneered once, holding up a receipt. We can afford new unless you're ashamed of us. And when I bought something new, it was, do you think money grows on trees? You need to learn to save. It was a trap I couldn't win. Daniel never saw the problem. She's just helping, he said. She knows about money more than we do. Why fight it? Because it wasn't help, it was surveillance. It was erasure. It was them pulling strings until I wasn't even sure which choices were mine anymore. And then came the emotional warfare. She's not a good mother. My mother-in-law would whisper loud enough for me to hear. Emily looks too thin. She should feed her better. Or why does she work? A real mother would stay home. She must not care enough about her child. But when I stayed home, it became she's lazy. All she does is sit around. No ambition. It didn't matter what I did, was never enough. And slowly I began to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe I was failing. Maybe I wasn't good enough. That's what abusers do best. They erode you from the inside out until you don't recognize yourself. I didn't realize how close I was to breaking until the night of Emily's 5th birthday. We had saved for weeks to give her a simple party, just a cake, a few balloons, a small pile of presents. But when Daniel's family arrived, everything turned into a spectacle. This is it, his mother said loudly, surveying the decorations I had strung with trembling hands. How humble. Emily's smile faltered and my heart cracked. I pulled her close, whispering that everything was perfect. But even she could feel the tension in the air. Later, I overheard my sister-in-law laughing in the kitchen. Poor Emily. Imagine growing up like this with such a mother. She'll never have what we had. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab them and shake them until their arrogance crumbled. But I didn't. I swallowed it. For Emily's sake, I told myself. But that night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Emily would grow up believing their words instead of mine. And then Christmas Eve happened. Standing outside in the snow, holding Emily's freezing body against mine, I realized I couldn't endure it any longer. Something had to change. But change never comes easy, especially when it means tearing apart the illusion of family. The next weeks were a blur of tension and silence. Daniel avoided me more than usual, staying late at work, spending hours in the garage, tinkering with nothing. His mother called daily, asking pointed questions about Emily's health. my temper, and whether I was over the incident yet. Over it. How could I ever be over seeing my child abandoned in the cold? The truth was, I was just beginning to find my voice, beginning to realize that silence had been my prison all along. And soon I would discover something even darker than I imagined, a secret hidden in their finances. One that explained everything. One that would turn suspicion into proof. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that the next confrontation was coming, and when it did, I wouldn't walk away quietly this time. After that Christmas Eve, I woke up every morning with a knot in my chest. Sleep no longer gave me peace. It was filled with images of Emily's shivering body pressed against the frosted window. Her eyes wide with confusion, silently asking me why. I told myself I had to be strong for her, for me. But strength doesn't appear all at once. It grows slowly, like a seed pushing through frozen ground. And in my case, that seed was anger mixed with suspicion. Because deep down, I knew there was more to what had happened than a foolish accident. No. One accidentally leaves a child outside in the dead of winter. Someone had done it deliberately, and the silence at that dinner table told me exactly who had orchestrated it. I just didn't know why. In the weeks that followed, I tried to bring it up with Daniel again. "Your mother?" I said one night as he climbed into bed. "She wanted Emily out there." I saw the look on her face when I carried her in. She wasn't surprised. She was smug. Daniel groaned and rolled onto his side. "Not this again." "You saw her, Daniel? You saw your daughter's lips turning blue. How can you act like it didn't happen?" "Because obsessing over it isn't helping anyone," he snapped, sitting up suddenly. His face was pale in the dim glow of the bedside lamp. "You think I don't feel guilty? You think I don't wonder what could have happened? Then why don't you stand up to them?" I shot back. "Why do you keep defending them instead of us?" His jaw clenched. "They've done everything for me. For us. Without them, we'd be drowning in debt. You don't bite the hand that feeds you." I stared at him, speechless. Did he even hear himself? Our child had nearly frozen to death, and all he could think about was what his parents provided. It hit me like a punch in the gut. He wasn't going to protect us. Not from them. Not from anything. If Emily and I were going to be safe, I had to protect us myself. It started small. I began keeping records notes on every conversation, every cruel remark, every suspicious incident. I saved receipts, copied bank statements, and stored them in a folder I hid beneath the floorboards in our bedroom. And that's when I began to notice the irregularities. At first, it was just numbers that didn't add up. My paycheck was deposited into the joint account, but by the end of the week, the balance was far lower than it should have been. Purchases I didn't make appeared on the statements. Boutique clothing stores I never entered. Expensive wine shops, spa treatments. I confronted Daniel. "Why are we paying for things we didn't buy?" I asked, holding up the paper. He barely glanced at it. "My mother uses the card sometimes. It's easier that way. Easier." I exploded. "That's theft, Daniel. She's stealing from us." "It's not theft," he said coldly. "It's family. Family." That word had become poison. The more I looked, the more I found. Thousands of dollars drained over the course of months. Investments made in my name without my consent. And then, the worst of all, a loan. One day I opened the mail to find a letter from the bank congratulating me on securing a $25,000 loan. My hands shook as I read it because I hadn't applied for any loan. "Daniel," I confronted him the moment he walked in the door. "What is this? Did you take out a loan in my name?" He froze, his face turning white. "Where did you find that?" "In the mail." I shoved the paper at his chest. "You forged my signature, didn't you?" His silence was answer enough. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear my own voice. "How could you do this?" "That's fraud." "That's my name, my credit." "It was my mother's idea," he said finally, his voice low. "We needed the money for a new investment. It'll pay off, I promise." I wanted to scream, throw something to shake him until he understood the weight of what he had done. But all I could do was collapse into a chair, trembling. They hadn't just humiliated me. They were destroying me financially, legally. They were setting me up to fail. And suddenly, Christmas Eve made sense. Emily being left in the cold wasn't just cruelty. It was a message, a warning, a way to remind me of my place, powerless, dependent, at their mercy, unless I fought back. But how does one woman fight an entire family entrenched in power and money? I thought about going to the police, but Daniel's father had been close friends with the chief. I considered talking to a lawyer, but the loan paperwork had my forged signature. What if they convinced the court it was mine? What if I ended up in jail while they walked free? Fear gnawed at me, but beneath it, determination grew stronger. One night after Daniel had fallen asleep, I crept into the living room where his mother kept a locked cabinet of documents. I had watched her enter the code many times. Her birthday, February 14th, a date she always boasted about. Born on the day of love. The lock clicked open. My hands shook as I rifled through folders. Property deeds, investment portfolios, contracts. And then there it was, a folder with my name on it. Inside were copies of the loan documents, along with something even more damning, a letter she had written to the bank posing as me. Her handwriting was neat, elegant, unmistakable. My chest tightened. Proof. I had proof. But as I stuffed the folder back into place, I heard a creak. My stomach dropped, looking for something. I spun around. There she was, my mother-in-law, standing in the doorway in her silk nightgown, her lips curled into that poisonous smile. My pulse thundered. You forged my name. I found the letter. She didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer, her perfume cloying in the air. And what will you do with it, dear? Run to the police. To the courts. Do you really think anyone will believe you over me? I swallowed hard, my fists clenched at my sides. I'll make them believe me. Her smile widened. You poor, silly girl. You don't understand. You've already lost. We own you. That loan is in your name. When it comes due and you can't pay, it'll be you they drag into court. Not me, not Daniel, you. My knees wobbled, but I forced myself to stand tall. I won't let you ruin me. Or Emily. She laughed softly, a sound like glass breaking. We'll see. And then she turned and walked back to her room, leaving me shaking in the dark, clutching the folder to my chest. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Emily's room watching her chest rise and fall as she dreamed. And I swore to myself I would protect her no matter what it cost. The next morning, I called my sister. Come get us. I whispered into the phone. I can't stay here anymore. But before I could pack, before I could escape, Daniel came home early. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling as he threw the folder down on the kitchen table. You went through her things, he hissed. She forged my signature, Daniel. She put us in debt in my name. She did it for us. He shouted, slamming his fist on the table so hard Emily flinched from the next room. You're tearing this family apart. No, I said, my voice shaking but firm. They are. And you're letting them. His face twisted with rage, and for a terrifying moment I thought he might strike me. But instead, he grabbed the folder, stuffed it into his jacket, and stormed out. I sank to the floor, trembling, Emily's little arms wrapping around my neck as she whispered, Mommy, don't cry. And that's when I realized I couldn't wait any longer. I had to act now. The next day I went to the police station. My hands shook as I explained everything. The forged loan, the financial control, the abuse. The officer listened, expressionless, scribbling notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. Do you have proof of the forgery? Yes, I said desperately. I saw the letter in her handwriting. But my husband took it. Without the document, it's your word against hers, he said. And given her standing in the community, he trailed off, shrugging. My stomach sank. Just as she had said, they wouldn't believe me over her. But then the officer leaned forward, lowering his voice. If you can get that letter, if you can bring me proof, I can open a case. But until then, I was on my own. That night, as snow fell silently outside, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the dark window. My reflection looked back at me, pale, tired but determined. I thought about the risks. If I stayed, they would destroy me. If I left without proof, they might still ruin me. But if I fought Tiff, I could somehow get that letter. I had a chance. A slim chance, but a chance. And then from upstairs, I heard Emily cry out in her sleep. I ran to her room, gathered her in my arms, and whispered into her hair, "I'll save us. I promise." But even as I said it, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate. I froze, clutching Emily tighter. And then the door creaked open. The door creaked open slowly, and my breath caught in my throat. I clutched Emily tighter, shielding her with my body, every nerve on edge. In the dim light from the hallway, Daniel's silhouette appeared. His shoulders filled the doorway, his face shadowed. "What are you doing in here?" His voice was low, almost a growl. "I'm comforting our daughter," I said firmly, though my voice trembled. "She had a nightmare." He stepped inside, his footsteps slow and deliberate, like a predator circling prey. His eyes landed on me, then on Emily, who whimpered softly in her sleep. "You've been talking to the police," he said finally. My stomach dropped. "How do you know?" "Don't play games with me." His lips curled into something between a sneer and a snarl. "My mother told me." One of her friends at the station overheard, of course. The connections ran deep. Every move I made, they somehow knew. "I had to," I whispered, standing up, Emily still in my arms. "You and your mother left me no choice." Daniel's face hardened. "You're making everything worse. Do you think you can win against us?" "Against her." "She'd crush you." "Maybe," I said, surprising even myself with the steadiness in my voice. "But I won't let her crush Emily for a moment." Something flickered in his eye-sphere. Doubt, or maybe the ghost of the man I once loved. But then it was gone, replaced by cold determination. "You need to stop this now," he said, his voice like ice. "Or I swear you'll regret it." And with that, he turned and left, the door slamming shut behind him. I stood there in the dark, my heart racing, Emily's small body pressed against mine. And I knew then I was no longer just fighting his mother. I was fighting him too. The next morning, I began to plan my escape. I couldn't just grab Emily and run. They had resources, lawyers, money. They could claim I was unstable, unfit. They could take her from me. I needed to be smart. I needed proof. I started small, pretending to play along, nodding during family dinners, keeping my head down. All the while, I searched for opportunities to get my hands on that letter again. But my mother-in-law was careful now. She kept the cabinet locked, the folder hidden. And Daniel watched me with suspicion, his eyes narrowing whenever I left the room. Still, I had allies. My sister visited often, bringing small gifts for Emily and quiet encouragement for me. One day, she slipped me a small recorder. "Keep it on you," she whispered. "Catch them saying something, anything. You need evidence." It wasn't much, but it was a start. A week later, I got my first break. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I overheard my mother-in-law speaking on the phone in the next room. "Yes, the loan went through," she was saying, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "In her name, of course. She has no idea how deep she's in." My hands shook as I reached into my pocket, fumbling with the recorder. I pressed the button just in time to catch her next words. "When it defaults, she'll have nothing. And then Daniel will finally see reason. He'll realize she's a liability, and I'll make sure she's out of our lives for good." My blood turned to ice. She wasn't just trying to control me, she wanted to erase me completely. I pressed my back against the wall, clutching the recorder like a lifeline. Proof, not as strong as the letter, but enough to show intent, enough to show malice. That night, I hid the recorder beneath the floorboard with the other documents. My secret arsenal growing piece by piece. But gathering evidence came with risks. One afternoon, as I picked Emily up from school, another mother approached me. She leaned in close, her voice low. "Be careful," she whispered. "Your mother-in-law has been talking. She's saying you're unstable, that you scream at Emily, that you neglect her." My chest tightened. "That's not true." "I know," she said quickly, "but others might not." She has influence. People believe her. I thanked her, my hands trembling as I gripped Emily's hand tighter. They were building a case against me, turning the community against me. That night, I confronted Daniel again. "Your mother is spreading lies about me," I said. "Do you even care?" He didn't even look up from his phone. If people are saying those things, maybe there's some truth to them. My jaw dropped. "Are you serious? You've seen how I treat Emily. You know, I would never hurt her." He finally looked at me then, his eyes flat. I don't know what to believe anymore. It felt like a knife to the heart. But even knives can forge steel. His betrayal didn't break MIT hardened me. I started reaching out quietly, carefully. I spoke to a lawyer recommended by a friend of my sister. I met her in secret in a small office downtown. Her name was Claire, and she had the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that immediately gave me hope. "Everything you're describing," she said, after I poured my heart out, "is textbook coercive control. Financial abuse, emotional abuse, alienation. You're not crazy. You're in danger." Tears welled in my eyes. "But what can I do? They have money, connections." She leaned forward. "What you have is truth. And if we can prove it, you can not only free yourself, you can protect your daughter." She gave me a list of things to collect: bank statements, recordings, witnesses. And most importantly, she told me to prepare for battle. "They will fight dirty," she warned. "You have to be ready." I walked out of her office with a strange mix of fear and determination. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a chance. But the war escalated faster than I expected. A week later, a social worker showed up at my door. "We've received reports," she said gently, "that your daughter may not be safe in this home." My heart stopped. "That's not true." "Who said that?" She shook her head. "I can't disclose that. But I need to check on Emily." I let her in, panic flooding my veins. She inspected the house, asked Emily questions, looked at the fridge, the bedrooms. Emily clung to me the whole time, her big eyes filled with confusion and fear. Afterward, the social worker pulled me aside. "Everything seems fine here. But be aware someone is trying to build a case against you. Keep records. Document everything." As she left, my knees nearly gave out. It was happening. They were trying to take Emily from me. I collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. Emily crawled into my lap, her little arms wrapping around me. "Mommy," she whispered, "are they going to take me away?" I hugged her tighter than ever. "No, baby, never. I promise." But inside, I wasn't so sure. The pressure mounted. Daniel grew more distant, spending nights away, coming home smelling of alcohol. His mother became bolder, criticizing me openly, even in front of Emily. And then came the final straw. One evening, I found Emily crying in her room. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, brushing her hair back. "Grandma said—" She hiccuped through tears. "She said you don't love me, that you only keep me because you don't want Daddy to be happy." My vision blurred with rage. How dare she poison my daughter against me? I marched downstairs into the living room where my mother-in-law sat with a glass of wine, smirking. "How dare you?" I shouted. "How dare you tell my daughter I don't love her?" She didn't flinch. "Children should know the truth." "The truth?" I screamed. "You wouldn't know the truth if it slapped you in the face. You're trying to destroy me, and now you're dragging Emily into it. You're sick?" She stood slowly, her eyes gleaming with cold fury. "Careful, dear. One more outburst like that, and people might really start to believe you're unstable." I wanted to lunge at her, to tear that smug smile from her face. But then I remembered the recorder in my pocket. I pressed the button, praying it captured enough. Her words, her threats, her venom, they were all on tape now. Another piece of the puzzle. But as I slipped back upstairs, heart pounding, I knew I was running out of time. Because they weren't just trying to control me anymore. They were trying to erase me, piece by piece, until Emily no longer saw me as her mother at all. And unless I struck first, they just might succeed. The next morning, I woke to find Daniel gone again. But this time his closet was half empty. Clothes missing. Shoes gone. Panic surged through me. I called his phone. No answer. I called again and again until finally he picked up. "What's going on?" I demanded. "Where are you?" There was a pause, and then his voice flat and cold. "I'm staying with my parents for a while." With Emily, my blood ran cold. With Emily. "Where is she?" "She's fine," he said. "But I think it's best if she stays with us for now. Until you get yourself sorted out." My vision went black around the edges. "You can't do this. She's my daughter." "Not just yours," he said quietly. "And if you keep fighting us, you'll lose her." The line went dead. I dropped the phone, my hands trembling, my knees buckling beneath me. They had her, and I had nothing except a few recordings, a few scraps of proof, and the fire in my chest that refused to die. This was no longer about survival. It was war. The silence in the house was unbearable. For the first time in years, Emily's laughter wasn't echoing through the halls. Her little shoes weren't scattered by the door. Her favorite doll didn't sit forgotten on the couch. It was as if the life had been drained from these walls, leaving only shadows and my pounding heartbeat. They had taken her. My daughter. My reason for enduring every insult, every humiliation, every sacrifice. And now they had her in their clutches, feeding her lies, twisting her world until I was the villain. I collapsed to the floor, sobs tearing from my chest. But grief quickly hardened into resolve. They thought they had won. They thought they could erase me. But they underestimated the power of a mother's fury. I would get her back, whatever it took. The next morning, I called Claire, the lawyer. My voice shook as I explained what had happened. "They took her," I whispered. "Daniel moved out and kept Emily with them." There was a pause on the line. Then Claire's steady voice. "Listen to me carefully. Do not panic. This is not legal. He cannot just take your child without your consent or a court order. We can fight this." Tears blurred my vision. "But what if they brainwash her? What if she believes their lies?" "Children are resilient," Claire said. "What matters now is that we act quickly." "Do you still have the recordings?" "Yes," I said, clutching the floorboard where I had hidden them. "And bank statements. And witnesses. Good. That's your arsenal. We'll file for emergency custody. But you have to be ready for a war." "I'm ready," I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "I'll do whatever it takes." But while Claire prepared the paperwork, I couldn't sit idly by. I needed to see Emily to remind her I hadn't abandoned her. So that evening, I drove to the house where Daniel was staying with his parents. The grand estate loomed against the winter sky, its windows glowing with warm light. My stomach churned as I approached the door. I knocked hard. My mother-in-law opened it, her face lit with satisfaction. Well, look who decided to crawl back." "Where is she?" I demanded. "Where's Emily?" "She's asleep," she said smoothly. "And she's fine. Better off without your chaos." I tried to push past her, but she blocked the doorway with surprising strength. "If you try to force your way in, I'll call the police. And guess who they'll believe?" Rage burned through me. "She's my daughter. You can't keep her from me." Her lips curled. "Watch me." Just then, Daniel appeared in the hallway, Emily in his arms, her eyes half closed with sleep. My heart lurched. "Mommy," she cried, reaching toward me. But Daniel turned, carrying her back upstairs. Her little voice echoed down the hall. "Mommy, don't go." I fell to my knees on the porch, sobs ripping through me as the door slammed in my face. That moment carved itself into my soul like a wound that would never heal. The days that followed were torture. Every second without Emily felt like a lifetime. I called, but Daniel rarely answered. When he did, it was brief, cold, dismissive. "She's fine," he said once. "Stop harassing us. She's my daughter." I screamed into the phone. "You can't keep her from me." "Maybe not forever," he said calmly. "But right now, the courts will see you for what you are. Unstable, vindictive. You'll lose." I hung up, shaking, then threw the phone across the room. But Claire's words echoed in my head. "Don't panic. We can fight this." So I gathered everything I had. I copied the recordings onto multiple drives. I printed bank statements, highlighting every suspicious charge. I wrote down every incident of neglect and abuse. And then I waited for the court date. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere. The walls were sterile, the air heavy with judgment. Daniel sat on one side with his parents, their lawyer beside them, a slick man in an expensive suit. I sat on the other with Claire, my hands trembling in my lap. When Emily entered, escorted by a child advocate, my heart ached. She looked so small, clutching her stuffed bunny. Her eyes darted to me, then to her father, confusion clouding her face. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, began the proceedings. Daniel's lawyer spoke first, painting me as unstable, erratic, unfit. He referenced the social worker's visit, twisting it to sound as if Emily had been in danger. He called witness-sized neighbors, who claimed they had heard me yelling. Relatives who swore I was difficult. I wanted to scream, to stand up and shout the truth. But Claire squeezed my hand, whispering, "Wait, our turn will come." When it did, she presented the recordings. The courtroom fell silent as my mother-in-law's voice played. She has no idea how deep she's in. When it defaults, she'll have nothing. I'll make sure she's out of our lives for good. The judge's expression hardened. Then came the second recording, her taunting me. One more outburst like that. Think people might really start to believe you're unstable? The silence was deafening. Claire pressed on, presenting the forged bank documents, the suspicious transactions, the testimony from my sister and others who had witnessed the family's cruelty. By the time she finished, the tide had shifted. But then came the most painful part. Emily was asked to speak. She sat in the witness chair, her little legs swinging nervously. "Do you love your mommy?" the advocate asked. "Yes," she whispered. "And do you love your daddy?" "Yes," my heart cracked. "And who do you want to live with?" Emily's eyes filled with tears. She looked at me, then at Daniel. Her lip trembled. I just want everyone to stop fighting." The room fell silent. The judge sighed, her eyes softening. "Thank you, sweetheart." That's all Emily was let out, and I wanted nothing more than to run after her, to scoop her up and promise her it would be okay. But I had to sit there silent as my fate and hers was decided. After hours of testimony and evidence, the judge finally spoke. "This is not an easy case, but it is clear to me that there has been manipulation, financial coercion, and attempts to alienate this child from her mother. Effective immediately, temporary custody will be granted to the mother, pending further investigation. The father will have supervised visitation." My breath caught. Temporary custody. It wasn't over, but it was a victory. As the gavel struck, I felt tears stream down my face. For the first time in weeks, hope surged in my chest. But as I turned to leave, I saw my mother-in-law's eyes burning into me, her lips curling into a silent promise. This isn't over. And deep down, I knew she was right. The weeks that followed were bittersweet. Emily was back with me, her laughter once again filling the house. We baked cookies, decorated late Christmas ornaments, and tried to rebuild the sense of normalcy that had been shattered. But shadows lingered. Emily would wake at night crying, asking why Grandma had said I didn't love her. She flinched when the phone rang, afraid it meant she'd be taken away again. I reassured her, held her close, but inside I seethed. They had scarred her, and for that I would never forgive them. Claire warned me that the final custody hearing could go either way. "They're relentless," she said. "They'll dig up every scrap they can. Be ready for lies, for attacks. But remember, you have truth, and you have me." I nodded, determination burning in my chest. I won't let them win. But even as I said it, I knew the battle wasn't just in the courtroom. It was in the whispers around town, the judgmental glances at the grocery store, the tension in every conversation. They were trying to isolate me, to paint me as the villain. And sometimes, late at night, doubt crept in. What if the judge believed them? What if I lost Emily forever? But then I would hear Emily's soft breathing in the next room, and the fear would transform into fire, because losing was not an option. The night before the final hearing, I couldn't sleep. I paced the house, going over every piece of evidence, every argument, every possibility. And then, around midnight, a knock at the door startled me. I froze. Who had come at this hour? Slowly I approached, peering through the peephole. And my blood ran cold. It was my mother-in-law. Standing there in the dark, her coat wrapped tightly around her, her face twisted into a smile that promised nothing good. I hesitated, heart pounding. Then, against my better judgment, I opened the door just a crack. "What do you want?" I demanded. She leaned in, her eyes gleaming. "One last chance, dear. Drop the case. Walk away. And maybe, just maybe, we'll let you keep Emily." Rage boiled inside me. "She's not yours to give or take. She's my daughter." Her smile widened. "Then I suppose we'll see you in court. And when we win, I'll make sure she forgets you ever existed." And with that, she turned and walked into the night, leaving me shaking in the doorway. But her threat had the opposite effect she intended. Instead of scaring me, it solidified my resolve. Tomorrow, I would face them in court. And tomorrow, I would fight with everything I had. The morning of the final hearing felt like the morning of a storm. The sky outside was a flat, oppressive gray. And when I stepped out of the car into the courthouse courtyard, the air bit at my cheeks like tiny knives. I clutched Emily's hand as we walked up the stone steps, each one echoing in my bones. She wore her favorite blue coat, the one with the little silver stars embroidered on the hood. It made her look impossibly small and brave, like some fragile comet carrying all my hopes. Inside, the courthouse had the familiar antiseptic smell of paper and old varnish. People moved through the hallways in self-contained bubbles of anxiety, some whispering. Some laughing nervously, some avoiding eye contact like predators avoiding prey. When we took our seats in the waiting area, I felt the weight of every stare. I was public enemy number one again in their eyes. The woman who challenged a respected family. The woman who dared to expose ugly truths behind a respectable facade. Claire sat beside me, her face calm, a map of strategy in her eyes. She had been my fortress, quietly fierce, infinitely patient, the kind of lawyer who made other lawyers adjust their suits when she entered a room. Across from us sat the slick opposing counsel, his pen tapping rhythmically as though each tick could beat me into defeat. "What's our opening?" I whispered. Claire reached over, squeezed my hand. "We show the court who she really is. The recordings, the loan documents, the bank transfers. We bring witnesses who will corroborate the pattern. And most of all, we show Emily safely and lovingly that you are her mother and that their manipulations are that. Manipulations." She had a plan. The plan felt like a brittle raft in a storm, but it was a raft. I clung to it. The courtroom filled, the judge took her bench, and the hearing began. The opposing counsel moved first, spinning a careful web of insinuation. My supposed outbursts, the social worker's concerns. My reckless behavior while struggling under the pressures of life. He spoke with an oily charm, selecting phrases to punch at the jury's sympathies. He knew the playbook for this kind of family, for communities who believed lineage meant virtue. When Claire stood, she was a steady flame. She played the first recording, my mother-in-law's voice, cold and pleased as she described putting the loan in my name and how, when I defaulted, they'd make sure I had nothing. The room shifted. You could feel a collective intake of breath. Then she walked the court through bank statements. Every suspicious charge circled, every transfer explained with dates and context. She presented witnesses. My sister who testified to the emotional abuse, a neighbor who'd seen the locked door that night, and the mother who'd warned me about the rumors being spread. Every piece of evidence nudged the story forward like a pressed finger along the spine of a book. My stomach knotted with horror and hope in equal measure. They were pieces of the truth I'd scavenged like bones for years. Now they were being lifted into the light. But the hearing was not a simple linear march toward justice. No, this was a battle, and their counters were sharp. The opposing counsel raised every possible doubt, questioned motives, and highlighted every slip I had made, times when my anger had shown, times when I'd raised my voice. They had set a trap with the term unstable, and they drilled it until it echoed through the room. In the gallery, my mother-in-law sat like a statue carved of disdain. Her eyes were a black river. She showed no tremor, no human softness. But her smile was brittle at times, and once. As Claire called a witness who corroborated the locked door incident, I caught her hand tremble ever so slightly. It was so small I nearly missed it. But in a room full of performance, a micro-expression can be a fault line. Midway through the day, Claire laid out a posture that felt like a gamble. We would bring in the financial analyst who had traced those dubious transactions. If he could demonstrate a pattern repeated, intentional diversions of funds from our household into accounts controlled by Daniel's family that would not only establish theft, but calculate motive. A family that siphoned finances to destabilize a dependent mother. That was coercive control in living color. The analyst spoke with slow patience, explaining the trail in terms that made the courtroom nod. You can see, he said, tapping a chart. A repetitive pattern payments, transfers. Then reductions in the joint account occurring simultaneously with major purchases or transfers to accounts tied to the THE. SNA's businesses. On a statistical level, this is not random. He looked at the judge, then at the jury. It appears to be systematic and purposeful. The judge's jaw tightened. People in the gallery shifted again. The fabric of their perception of that family was fraying. I thought then of the nights I'd sat alone, shivering with fear and fury, cataloging receipts, saving the scraps. The rituals so painstaking, so domestic had become an armor I had never imagined could carry me here. And yet they had one that made my blood run cold. During a recess in the hallway lined with marble and bureaucratic portraits, I stepped outside to get air. The scent of rain was in the wind, and I felt like a mariner on a sinking ship. A voice beside me made me start. You did well today. It was Marcus's neighbor who had seen the locked door. He'd been quiet in the courtroom, but determined. His testimony had been blunt and helpful. He was stocky and rubbed a hand over his beard when he spoke. There's something else. I kept my eye on them for months. I recorded a conversation I think you should hear. It's on a flash drive. I couldn't bring it in without a lawyer's permission, but maybe my pulse leaped. What conversation? He paused, looking both ways, as if the courthouse walls had ears. Between Daniel and his brother. They were talking about what to do about you. About the loan. About removing complications. I don't know exactly what he meant, but Marcus, I can't. He handed me a small envelope with a trembling hand. Claire should listen. It might help. I took it like a lifeline. The envelope was small and warm from his grip. Inside was a flash drive and a sticky note. Marcus recorded November 8th, found in gazebo. Voices at 9:12 p.m. This felt like a second breath. More proof. But at the same time, the risk rose. If Daniel or his family suspected I had such evidence, they could escalate. They could retaliate in 1,000 petty, dangerous ways. When I stepped back into the courtroom, the lunch break had ended. Claire slid an appraising glance my way, her face unreadable. Later that afternoon, she pulled me aside in a private room. That flash drive good. We can move to introduce it as evidence if what's on it is relevant and authentic. But we have to be careful. If it's not properly authenticated, they'll attack it. Do you trust Marcus? Definitely, I said. He's been quiet, but solid. My voice dropped. He's also not the type to involve himself unless he thought it was important. Claire nodded. Okay, we'll have it analyzed, and if it checks out, we'll submit it. But for now, you need to be prepared for counterattacks. They will come. She studied me, a small human question in her eyes. Are you ready? I realized then, ready or not, I had come too far to retreat. My hands were raw from clutching the edges of this life. My heart was ragged in the way only a parent's can be. I would see it through. The final testimony began. Then something happened that none of us expected, a twist the courtroom didn't see coming. Midway through Claire's cross-examination of Daniel's lawyer, the door to the courtroom opened. Everyone turned. A man in a plain jacket entered and paused, his face familiar from the neighborhood. Mr. Portman, an elderly man who owned a small warehouse at the edge of town. He had been one of those who'd quietly offered to testify, but then had said he'd need time to gather his documents. He walked up to the bench with slow, deliberate steps. "Your Honor," he said, voice trembling but clear, "I have something to add." The judge gestured, and Mr. Portman approached the clerk, presenting a slim packet of papers. Claire's eyes narrowed. She rose slowly and said, "We would ask for a brief recess to authenticate and view these documents." The courtroom buzzed like a hive. The packet was passed quickly into the judge's hands. After a tense moment, the judge allowed the documents to be read into the record. They were property records old, dusty, but legal, that showed a series of transfers, hidden in convoluted shell company listings. And they're like a thread of red pulled through gray. It's a clear trail. Properties bought, transferred, then encumbered in ways that benefited accounts associated with Daniel's mother's business holdings. One document was dated 2 years earlier, and on it, the signature was unmistakable. My husband's, or rather, a signature in his name, though the notary mark attached to it suggested something else. He had possibly been coerced, or he had signed without understanding. The notation also referenced a separate document, a power of attorney that had been granted to the mother-in-law on a limited basis. But the signature seemed questionable. The gallery erupted into whispers. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would burst. But the shock had only just begun. As the clerk continued to leaf through the packet, a single page slipped out and fluttered onto the floor between the benches. The judge stooped to pick it up and read it. Her face, so often a mask of composed neutrality, registered something like astonishment. It was a letter, a handwritten raw letter, dated and signed. The handwriting looked like Daniel's, but the content my hands trembled as I heard the clerk read was damning. It was a confession, but not the kind the court likes to see neatly packaged. It was a plea, a messy echo of someone drowning. I cannot stand by while they destroy us. The letter read in part, I let them make decisions I didn't understand. I signed papers they placed before me while I drank to stop the pain. I thought I was helping protecting our reputation, securing our future, but they used my name. I am sorry. Tell her I'm sorry. Claire's eyes met mine across the courtroom, something fierce and stunned burning there. The opposing counsel turned pale as a paper was read aloud. Daniel's face was a study in shock and then something else, shame, raw and unmediated. He had not expected this letter to surface. No one had. The room seemed to tilt. For the first time in months, the illusion of a monolithic family power cracked and the human rot within it was exposed. But how did Mr. Portman, a warehouse owner, possess such intimate documents? The story surfaced like oil on water. Mr. Portman had done business with some of the mother-in-law's firms years before and had kept a ledger-old inconvenient records tucked away. He'd been quietly watching, as had others in town, and in a moment of conscience had decided to come forward. His voice when he spoke was thick with age and fatigue. I kept these because I thought someday someone would need them, he said simply. The effect on the courtroom was seismic. The opposing counsel sputtered a rapid attempt to discredit Mr. Portman's questions about memory, about motive, but the documents were documents, and the handwriting, the dates. The notary stamps, they all pointed forward like teeth in a trap. Claire moved like a hunter. She asked to admit the letter and the property records into evidence. The judge allowed it under protest and with careful admonitions about authenticity checks. As the documents were accepted, I felt both elation and terror. If these papers were allowed to stand, the legal scaffolding supporting their campaign against me could crumble. But the more I felt exposed, the more dangerous it became because a desperate animal will strike when cornered. The day's hearing adjourned for the court to review the new evidence, a recess that felt suspended in hot air. Claire and I sat in a small anteroom, the packet of Mr. Portman's documents between us, the weight of them heavy and warm. She looked at me, her face softening. You did this, she said. Not you alone, but you and the truth. They underestimated you. I wanted to say I hadn't wanted to say that it had been Marcus, Portman, others. But the truth was, this was the sum of my stubbornness. The long nights of logging receipts, The small, furtive bravery of taking the recorder to the floorboard? I had been building a case in the margins of my life while pretending to be a compliant daughter-in-law. It felt like a miracle and a monstrous exposure at once. We returned to the courtroom as the judge called us back to order. The mood had turned. The gallery hummed like a plucked string. But then, just as the clerk announced the next item on the docket, the courtroom doors burst open. A man in plainclothes detective's jacket, badge glinting, strode in. He looked at the judge, then at the lawyers, and said, "We need to place a temporary hold on any changes to property or financial accounts associated with this family pending an investigation. We've received a tip that assets may be moved tonight." Gasps. The opposing counsel tried to object, but the judge interrupted. Her gavel a sudden hammer. "Explain." The detective did. A bank had flagged a series of unusual transfers that matched the pattern laid out in the litigation, and they requested a freeze while they traced the funds. It felt like the floor beneath us had become less slippery. The authorities were finally looking where I had been pointing my flashlight for months. But the victory was not complete. As the judge conferred with her clerk, a murmur rippled through the gallery. Someone had leaned over and whispered something into Daniel's ear. His eyes widened. He stood abruptly, paper slipping from his hand. He glanced at me, then at his mother, then down at his shoes, like a man who'd been sentenced but not yet told his fate. His face went pale, then red, then gray. For a moment, he looked every bit the puppet he had been made to be. But then anger flared. "You brought me here, dragged my name through dirt," he snapped, voice breaking. "You made me sign things I did not understand. You made promises and gave me drink and said, 'Trust us.' I trusted you because I loved what you offered. You turned me into what you needed." A hush fell like a curtain. The mother-in-law's face tightened, the brittle smile gone. And then, in a voice low and raw enough to break glass, he said, "I'm done hiding. I want to speak. I want to tell the truth." All eyes swung to the judge. She considered, then nodded. "You will be sworn." My heart launched. This was the twist I had not dared to hope for. Daniel, stepping into the center, choosing to say the words aloud that might finally topple the walls. He took the stand. His hands trembled. He looked at Miat, the little comet in her blue coat hand. His eyes were full of something like regret that had no language but shame. He began. Then he stopped, swallowing. He ran a hand through his hair. "I want to tell the truth. Not because I am a hero, but because I can't live with a lie anymore." The room leaned forward as though gravity itself wanted to hear. "What did you sign?" Claire asked, calm but precise. He closed his eyes and inhaled. "Papers. Power of attorney. Property transfers. Loans I signed when I was told it was paperwork to secure our future. I was told not to read the fine print, that the accountant would handle it. I was told it would be okay." His voice cracked. "I drank. I was ashamed of my weakness. I thought I was protecting us. Instead, I watched them use my name like a weapon." He paused. He looked at his mother, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. It was not just the fear of court, of reputation. It was the stark fear of a man she'd underestimated snapping the string of a puppet. And when Emily was left outside, Claire asked, the courtroom breathless. He flinched. The color drained from his face. "I didn't know she would be left out there. I swear I didn't know." He looked at me, and I could read it like a torn map. Guilt. Terror. A plea for a mercy he didn't think he deserved. "But I knew they were trying to push you. I knew they wanted you broken. I told myself I would step in. I tried to stop them sometimes, but I was weak. Weak, the word cut like a blade." But there was also a clarity in his admission that rung true in ways his earlier silence never did. The opposing counsel jumped like a struck animal, furious at this betrayal. "Your Honor, this is self-serving. He's trying to absolve himself, but the judge held up a hand. He is under oath. Daniel's confession was messy, and it raised more questions than it answered. How complicit was he? How far had fear and manipulation driven him? But as Claire pounced carefully, surgically on the details, a weaker strand began to reveal itself. that this was not merely an act of cruelty by a domineering matriarch, but a broader conspiracy of control that used family bonds, money and shame to imprison a woman and her child. It was the kind of truth that fell like a house of cards, and as if fate attempted to finish the job of revealing everything at once. The clerk announced that the bank had emailed the court. The detective had confirmed it accounts flagged. Attempts to move assets. Scheduled transfers tonight to offshore holdings. The courtroom buzz erupted into a mix of triumph and dread. We were closer than ever to unmasking them completely. But just when it felt like time might finally settle on some version of justice, the judge set her face and her voice became quiet and official. Given the gravity of these allegations and the new evidence presented today, I am issuing a temporary injunction against the transfer of assets and ordering a thorough criminal investigation. However, she glanced at the opposing counsel. Then at the family, this court will not make a final decision until the investigation is complete. In the meantime, both parties will remain under strict orders regarding contact. Strict orders. A kind word that packed an icy sting. It meant we had bought time, but only that. As we left the courtroom, the press had already started to gather outside. Flashbulbs popped like distant lightning. Marcus and Mr. Portman slipped away quietly. Claire walked by my side like a general returning from a battle that had not yet ended. My mother-in-law's expression was unreadable. Daniel's eyes were hollow. The man I once married reduced to a shell of shame and tremor. We walked into the brutal light of scrutiny. Our names now spoken in low, curious voices on the courthouse steps. People I'd never met stared. My world that had been small and mean and full of private torments had become public, and the public was hungry for a spectacle. That night at home, Emily slept beside me in a bed that suddenly felt too small for my swollen relief. I sat up late, poring through the documents, the recordings, the pieces of paper that had been my talismans for months. Each one represented a small victory, but also a new worry. If the investigation found more than we knew, there were deeper stains money laundered, threats that had never been voiced. I feared what they might unleash in retaliation. At 2 a.m, my phone buzzed. Claire's name flashed. "We've been notified," she said. "Detectives want to talk with you tomorrow morning. They want every piece of evidence you have. Do you have the flash drive from Marcus?" "Yes," I whispered. "It's with the others." "Good, bring it. And be careful. They're moving quickly." After the call, I lay awake in the dark, listening to Emily's even breath. I thought about how close we had come and about the precariousness of justice. The mother-in-law had built an empire on appearances. Now those appearances were beginning to peel away like paint in rain. But peeling reveals rot, and rot smells different to different kinds of people. Some step away. Others scramble to hide it. I fell asleep thinking about Daniel's confession. It was not the tidy bolt of salvation I had imagined. It was messy, human, a fracture opening in someone I had loved. But it was a fracture that let in light. For the first time in years, the light felt warm on my face. Then, in the gray of early morning, another knock came at the door soft. Precise a sound that made my heart leap in a way that had nothing to do with hope. I opened the door. Standing there was one of the detectives, a woman this time, badge clipped to her coat, eyes as hard as river stones. Behind her stood Marcus, and in his hand was a small envelope with the courthouse stamp. "We found something else," the detective said without preamble. "We need you to come down to the station. It's urgent." My mouth went dry. "What is it?" She glanced toward Marcus, who swallowed and said, "A safe deposit box. At the bank. I remembered seeing them use it months ago. There might be more documents." We followed up. There was a key in one of the ledgers Mr. Portman had. It matched a safe deposit box. A key. My chest tightened. If there was a hidden ledger. More confessions. Evidence of deeper schemes than the entire house of cards could collapse. But the danger went up a notch, too. The closer we came to the center, the more likely the serpents would strike. I grabbed my coat without thinking, grabbed Emily's hand. The detective reached for the envelope and added in a lower voice, "One more thing. You'll want to see this in person. As we drove to the station, my mind spun with possibilities. The city lights streaked like memory. I thought of how small actions a recorder under floorboards. A neighbor's conscience. An old warehouse ledger had gathered into an avalanche. The thought that justice could be built from such small stones made me weep silently into my collar. When we arrived, the station smelled of coffee and official purpose. The detective led us into an evidence room where a clerk unlocked a big safe. Marcus leaned close, eyes fixed on the tiny key in his palm. The clerk opened a row of safety boxes, then slid out one with a metal click. Inside sat a thick envelope, yellowed and brittle, stamped with dates. The clerk slid it toward us. My hands shook as I reached out. I felt like someone reaching for the last raft out to sea. I broke the seal. Inside, folded and creased, were documents, photographs, contracts. And then my breath stalled. A small, thin photograph of my daughter, taken from the window that night. There, in grainy black and white, was Emily small against the snow, the porch light casting her shadow, her little coat curled around her. And in the background between the curtains, a figure, a silhouette, moving away from the door. The photograph was dated. The date matched the night Emily had been left outside. My throat closed. "Who took this?" I whispered. The detective's eyes were unreadable. "That's what we need to find out." As Claire placed a hand on my shoulder, I realized something I had always known and never said aloud. In their attempt to make me invisible, they had left breadcrumbs. In their arrogance, they had left proof. And when ego and cruelty collide, even the most careful will sometimes forget to destroy every trace. Then, just as the detective reached for another envelope, the door to the evidence room banged open. A courier stepped in, breathless, carrying a sealed manila folder with no return address. He handed it to the detective and said, "Found this at the bank when staff tried to trace recent transfers. It was in with the flagged transactions. Someone dropped it in with the deposit slip." The detective frowned. She slit the envelope open. Inside was a typed letter. The words were blunt and clinical. "To whom it may concern, if you are reading this, it means our plans have become exposed. We have moved assets accordingly. There is one final safeguard in place unless this reaches the proper hands. The key lies where the truth cannot find it. Do not underestimate the lengths we will go to preserve the family name." Beneath the typed paragraph was a line, handwritten in the same neat scrawl I had seen before. The same handwriting as the letter Daniel had written, more controlled. It read, M. The detective's face went slack. My heart hammered. M4. She looked at the clerk. "Mother-in-law." The clerk nodded. "Their files show a habit of using initials. She uses M often in her correspondences." A cold, hard fear slithered through me like winter water. This was no longer just about legal battles or custody. This was about people willing to do anything to protect what they had: money, reputation, power. And their last line, "the key lies where the truth cannot find it," sounded like a riddle meant to delay us, to taunt. Claire's voice was soft but fierce. "We follow every lead. We trace that typed letter. We freeze whatever assets are left. We protect the child. We do not retreat." But even as she spoke, the detective looked at me. "There's something else," she said. "We want you to be careful. They may try to react. We've had a call from an anonymous number. Someone warned that they might make a move tonight to settle things." My stomach dropped. The sensation was not panic precisely. It was recognition. They were cornered animals. They could lash out. I thought of Emily asleep in our home, of warm coats and blue stars, and the small sound of breath. My hands clenched into fists until my nails hurt. "Whatever happens," I said, my voice steady though my body trembled, "I will not let them take her from me again." The detective nodded. Marcus placed his hand over mine, rough and grounding. We left the station with a plan and a knot of dread in our bellies. The night was black as velvet, and every shadow looked like a hand. As we pulled into my driveway, headlights slicing through the dark, I looked up at the window where Emily's room was. The curtains were drawn. A pale moonlight slivered across the roof. For a moment, the world felt poised between breath and scream. And then there was the soft, almost imperceptible at first, the metallic click of a lock somewhere in the house. It was too precise. I froze. Marcus's face went white. "Heard that?" he mouthed. Before I could move, a car door slammed down the block, the engine roaring, and lights disappeared into the night. The metallic click repeated, closer this time. My pulse climbed a drumbeat in my throat. Claire's words from the evidence room echoed. "They may make a move tonight to settle things." My hands found the doorknob. I thought of the photograph Emily's small against the snow, the silhouette in the background. Someone had been watching that night. Someone had watched us then and might be watching now. I had pieces of truth. Allies who dared to speak. A judge who had frozen assets. The police on our side, at least for the moment. But the final move, what would it look like? Would they try to scare us out of town? Would they take something more dangerous? My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number. A line of dread crawled up my spine like ice. Before I could think, the phone lit up with a single text. "We know where you hide the recorder. Hand it over. Walk away, and no one gets hurt." My hands went ice cold. The house around me felt suddenly too small and too loud. I looked up at Emily's window, at the sliver of moonlight, and thought of the photograph of the silhouette in the background, and of the way a cruel family had tried to piece my life together like a puzzle with missing parts. Some choices demand motion. Some demand stillness. I took a breath, felt the air in my chest like a blade. My voice was a whisper as I said to Marcus, to Claire, to the night, "They're not taking me anywhere." And then the house lights went out in the street, plunging the neighborhood into an absolute black that hummed with threatened things. The blackout was so sudden it felt deliberate. 1 second the street was lined with golden halos of lamplight. The next it was plunged into a suffocating darkness. My chest seized. Emily's window above us was a black square. Marcus grabbed my arm. They cut the power. The detective swore under her breath, fumbling for her radio. "Units, I need backup at the residence. Possible breach." Static hissed. The line was dead. Even the radio had gone silent. It wasn't just our street. The entire block was dark. I felt the air shift like a presence sliding closer through the black. My instincts screamed louder than any siren. "Emily!" I bolted for the door, fumbling with my keys. My hands shook so hard the keys jangled like nervous bones. The door gave way. The house was silent except for the faint creak of floorboards. Every shadow looked alive, stretching too long in the flicker of my flashlight. My pulse hammered in my ears as I sprinted up the stairs, 2 at a time, Marcus behind me. I burst into Emily's room. My heart nearly stopped. The window was open. The curtains fluttered wildly in the cold wind. Emily's bed was empty. Nitrogen Manak. The scream tore out of me, primal and raw. I stumbled to the window, leaning out into the night. A figure was moving across the yard below, a small bundle struggling in their arms. "Emily!" Her muffled cries split the darkness. Marcus didn't hesitate. He barreled down the stairs and out the back door. I followed, my lungs burning, my bare feet cutting against gravel. The figure ran toward the waiting car parked at the edge of the block, headlights flashing once like a signal. My blood froze. I knew that silhouette, that rigid posture. My mother-in-law? She shoved Emily into the back seat. Emily kicked and screamed, her voice desperate. "Mommy, Mommy." The car engine roared. But Marcus was faster. He lunged, yanking open the rear door just as the car jerked forward. Tires screamed against asphalt. He grabbed Emily, pulling her free. The car fishtailed, the door slamming shut as it sped away into the night, red taillights bleeding into the dark. Emily tumbled into Marcus's arms, sobbing. I fell to my knees in the yard, clutching her when he handed her over. Pressing her face into my chest, swearing over and over, "I've got you. I've got you. They'll never take you again." The detective caught up, breathless, her gun drawn too late. She barked into her backup radio, this time connecting. Sirens wailed in the distance. But in that moment, All I cared about was the tiny heartbeat fluttering against mine. She was safe. She was mine. Hours later, the police swarmed the neighborhood, canvassing, searching. The car was found abandoned miles away, its plates stolen, its interior wiped down. But the attempt had sealed their fate. The judge convened an emergency session at dawn. The evidence we had gathered, the bank transfers, the forged documents, the recordings, was damning enough. But the attempted abduction of Emily tipped the scales beyond question. My mother-in-law was arrested, her face pale and tight as the cameras flashed. Daniel's brother, too, implicated by Marcus's recording. Daniel himself sat slumped, his face gray, his hands cuffed. He didn't resist. He looked at me once, his eyes hollow, and mouthed, "I'm sorry." I didn't know if he meant it. And maybe it didn't matter anymore. The court granted me full custody. Not temporary, permanent. When the gavel fell, I wept not out of joy, not yet, but out of exhaustion. Years of manipulation, humiliation, and fear had led to this moment. For the first time, the chain around my neck was gone. Emily sat beside me, clutching my hand. "Does this mean we can go home, Mommy?" "Yes, baby," I whispered, pressing a kiss to her hair. "This means we can finally go home." The weeks after were a strange blur of relief and reckoning. The investigation widened, exposing layers of fraud that reached far beyond me shield companies. Tax evasion, even bribery of local officials. Their empire crumbled in public view, their name stripped of its gloss. People who had once whispered against me now avoided my eyes out of shame. Some even apologized weakly, too late. But I no longer needed their validation. My life became smaller, simpler, but infinitely freer. I took Emily to school without fear. We ate dinner without barbed comments cutting the air. At night, when I tucked her into bed, her smile was no longer shadowed by confusion or fear. We painted her room yellow. We planted tulips in the garden. We laughed trio laughter, not the brittle, careful kind. And slowly, the scars began to fade. One evening, months later, Emily and I sat on the porch watching the sunset. She leaned against me, her small hand in mine. "Mommy," she asked softly. "Yes, sweetheart." "Why did they do it? Why were they so mean?" I swallowed hard. How could I explain the twisted hunger for control, the poison of power, the emptiness that drives cruelty? "Some people," I said gently, "they think love means control. They think family means ownership. They don't understand what real love is." Emily tilted her head. "What's real love?" I kissed her forehead. "Real love means freedom. It means wanting someone to be happy, even if it doesn't benefit you. Real love is warm, not cold. Safe, not scary." She thought for a moment, then nodded. "Like you love me." Tears filled my eyes. "Yes, baby, exactly like that." Looking back now, I see the story for what it was, not just a nightmare, but a crucible. I walked into it as a woman shackled by fear, and I walked out carrying fire. I learned that silence protects no one but abusers. That gratitude twisted into a leash is not gratitude at all, but chains. That survival sometimes means standing alone, but standing is still victory. Most of all, I learned that the fiercest force in the world is not wealth or reputation. It's a mother's refusal to let her child be destroyed. Christmas Eve will always carry a scar. The image of my daughter shivering in the snow will never leave me. But now, when winter comes, we light candles in the window. We bake cookies. We laugh. Because we survived. Because justice, however slow, came. Because dignity is not given, it is taken back piece by piece until it stands taller than the cruelty that tried to bury it. And when Emily grows older, when she asks about the shadows of her childhood, I will tell her, they tried to erase us. But we wrote our story anyway. And no one, not even them, can take that away. Reflection, if there is a lesson buried in my nightmare, it is this: never let anyone convince you that silence is strength or that suffering in shadows is noble. Speak, even if your voice shakes. Gather proof, even if it feels small. Find allies, even if they are few. Because the moment you decide you will no longer be erased, that is the moment you begin to win. And to anyone trapped in their own version of this story, you are not powerless. You are not alone. And you are not what they say you are. You are more. You are fire. You are free. Thank you so much for listening to this story on Voices of Auntie Leo. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us grow and bring you even more powerful stories. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below and share how this story made you feel, or what lessons you took from it. Your voice matters here. Once again, thank you, dear audience, for your time and support. Stay strong, stay inspired, and I'll see you again in the next stories right here on Voices of Auntie Leo.